Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Good morning and welcome to this public meeting of the Health and Welfare Committee. Welcome to all the members here and visitors in the gallery. My name is Tina Sablan. I'm the chair of the committee and I now call this meeting to order. For the record, today is Friday, April 30th, 2021. It is 9:00 a.m. Present today, members of the committee, we have Representative Sheila Babalta and BJ Attel. Representative Donald Maglonia will be joining us shortly. Vice Chair Leila Staffler is on Tinian still and will not be joining us today. With 3 members present, we have a quorum. Assisting the committee today from the Legislative Bureau, Ms. Claire Sablan, our Legislative Assistant, Mr. Joe Tyrone, our House Counsel, and Ms. Nava Coram, who is Legislative Aide for the committee. Welcome to all. At this time, may I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion is adopted. The agenda is adopted. And our next item in our order of business is the adoption of meeting minutes. Colleagues, I did send you a draft for the February 12th meeting, and I have not yet sent the draft for the February 26th meeting. I'd like to ask that we table adoption for today and hold that till the next meeting so everybody has a chance to review both. That's okay, no objection, thank you. Next on our agenda is public comments. At this time, the floor is open for public comments on any item in the agenda. We ask that oral statements be limited to 3 minutes or less. Longer written statements will be accepted today and after this meeting. Ms. Nava, do you have a list of speakers? And if you could please introduce yourself and state your name and position for the agency that you're representing.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam Chairwoman and committee members. I'm Keisha Blees, and I am Assistant Attorney General at the Civil Division. Thank you for including us in this discussion regarding Senate Bill 2022-40 to protect the people of CNMI from PFAS contamination. The proposed bill before you is the result of extensive review between the Attorney General's Office and other CNMI agencies, including VCQ, CUC, and CPA, to address per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as PFAS contamination, of several wells on Saipan. A common source of PFAS contamination in the CNMI is aqueous film-forming foam, also known as AFFF, which contain concentrated PFAS and is utilized at fire training locations, Department of Defense installations, and airports and other fire response sites. PFAS are man-made chemicals which are extremely difficult to break down and are commonly referred to as forever chemicals. According to extensive scientific research, certain PFAS chemicals pose significant health and environmental consequences. Exposure to PFAS has been linked to a variety of health concerns, including increased cholesterol levels, decreased fertility among women, developmental effects on infants, negative effects on the immune system, and certain types of cancers. PFAS is ingested by humans through a variety of pathways, but especially through drinking water. In 2016, the EPA issued a health advisory setting a 70 parts per trillion limit for PFOA and PFOS. However, the EPA has taken the position that these health advisories are non-enforceable and offer no protection for adverse health effects resulting from exposure. In the absence of enforceable federal limits, numerous states and territories have acted on their own to establish maximum contaminant levels more stringent than that of the EPA. Since 2016, the Commonwealth wells were tested for PFAS. The testing conducted by CUC showed PFAS contamination in multiple tanks and wells above the EPA health advisory limit of 70 parts per trillion. As a result, multiple wells have been removed from service and health advisories have been issued to several villages. PFAS contamination should be a primary concern for the Commonwealth, as its citizens are heavily dependent upon groundwater for its drinking water supply. The passage of this bill has two main benefits. First, it protects the community from the harmful effects of PFAS exposure by establishing enforceable limits for PFAS chemicals commonly found in the Commonwealth's groundwater and drinking water. And second, it creates a cause of action to pursue damages from the entities responsible for manufacturing, distributing, and marketing PFAS or AFFF that cause contamination in the CNMI. In November 2019, the Commonwealth joined several states and territories in lawsuits against manufacturers of these chemicals for contaminating water supplies and other natural resources. This case is ongoing, and the CNMI, along with its fellow personal injury plaintiffs, are set to be considered in the second round of bellwether cases that will be tried. The passage of this bill is vital because the CNMI will only have a short time to amend its complaint to include the causes of action and remedies that this bill will create. As additional studies and data have become available, acceptable levels of PFAS contamination have dropped substantially. So it's important for the CNMI to set by this statute BCQ's authority to set local PFAS standards to protect our community from the harmful effects of PFAS.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blaze. If you could please submit that written statement as well for the record, we'd appreciate that. And could you introduce your colleagues who are joining you?
Today I'm with Alison Nelson. She represents BCQ, and Jose Mafnes, who represents CUC, the agencies that we worked on.
Thank you. And do either of you, Ms. Nelson or Mr. Mafnes, have anything to add? Ms. Nelson, please.
Hi, I'm Allie Nelson, representing BECQ, and I just want to take a minute to explain the impact of this bill on BECQ. So while the bill will itself establish a maximum contaminant level, or an MCL, for 3 PFAS chemicals, it will also require BECQ to promulgate an MCL into its regulations. And that MCL has to be as protective as the standard established by this bill, or more protective if BECQ determines that after further study, some adjustment is needed for the protection of human health. It'll also authorize, the bill will characterize any regulated PFAS chemical as a toxic pollutant for purposes of the CNMI's water quality standards. And again, BECQ will then adopt water quality criteria or numeric pollutant concentration limits to protect designated uses of groundwater. And then finally, BECQ will adopt regulations to implement and enforce these MCLs in groundwater and drinking water. The MCLs in drinking water and the water quality criteria for groundwater, and we'll review every year any additional information to determine if changes are needed. So in short, the bill will provide a baseline level of protection upon its adoption, and then it will authorize BECQ to take further actions to protect human health as needed.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. May I ask, are those regulations already being drafted?
They have not already been drafted, but we also have Travis Spake, the Safe Drinking Water Program Manager here, who can speak to any technical questions that you might have regarding the regulations.
Thank you. Mr. Mafnes, did you want to go next?
Madam Chairwoman and honorable members of this House Committee, buenas and half day. My name is Jose Mafnes Jr. I'm an Assistant Attorney General and Legal Counsel for the Commonwealth Utilities Corporation. I'm joined right now by the Acting Executive Director, Mr. William Gilmore, along with Mr. Weston Knudsen, who will be answering any questions this committee might have. First, I'd like to thank this committee for the opportunity it has afforded myself, the Office of the Attorney General, and the Commonwealth Utilities Corporation to comment on this important piece of legislation. At the outset, I'd like to express that I am in support of SB 22-40. As stated in the bill, a common source of PFAS contamination has been found on previous Department of Defense installations, fire training locations, fire response sites, and airports. CUC has a total of 67 wells on or around the airport property. These wells serve thousands of residents in the south portion of Saipan. In order to mitigate PFAS contamination of the water, CUC has been forced to shut down certain wells and divert water in order to dilute the contamination to a point below the EPA's health advisory of 70 parts per trillion. Due to CUC's swift action, PFAS levels have been reported to be well below the EPA's health advisory for several months now. However, these actions have caused CUC to incur expenses specific to the diversion of water and dilution of contaminants. In addition, the presence of PFAS in the groundwater is not attributable to CUC. Due to such presence, CUC was required to purchase and install multiple granulated activated carbon filters, or GAC filters for short, to filter the PFAS from the water being provided to Saipan residents. These purchases have come at a tremendous cost to CUC, and ultimately its thousands of customers in our community. CUC and its customers bear these costs despite the fact that CUC is not responsible for the presence of such contamination in the first place. This bill is beneficial to CUC as an autonomous Cmi government entity because it would provide CUC through the Cmi avenues to pursue damages, which at this time is primarily in the form of reimbursements against the manufacturers, distributors, and marketers of PFAS or of AFFF containing PFAS. These reimbursements would cover the significant expenses CUC has since incurred and continues to incur in its effort to protect Saipan's residents from PFAS contamination. Also, this bill would shield both the CNMI and CUC's limited financial resources and budget by protecting them from liability. This shield from liability is especially important to CUC and its employees, as CUC is the only public utility provider for water. CUC should not be held liable for reasonably performing its duty of providing residents with efficient, consistent, and clean water services. I respectfully request this committee's support of this bill. I thank you all for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. And I'd like to recognize the presence of Representative Donald Maglonia at this time. Welcome, Representative Maglonia. Colleagues, do you have any questions for our guests?
I do.
Representative Abasa.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you for being with us today. I did have a question regarding current levels of PFAS in our groundwater, and I know that Mr. Moffitt, you did make a statement. Can you just restate that and clarify for the record what wells they were found in? They were below EPA levels, as you stated, and the maybe estimated cost this has cost our community, CUC.
Thank you for your question, Representative Abalta. If I could have Mr. Gilmore speak on that, he's more familiar with the details.
Good morning and welcome, Mr. Gilmore. If you could please just state your name and position for the record.
William Gilmore, Acting Executive Director of CUC. In answer to your question, we've spent, with regard to the 10 GAC units, approximately $800,000 just for those elements alone. On top of that, there has been some construction charges that have gone along with the installation as well as that. We have to spend, every time we take a test for the contaminant at certain sites, it's $500 per test. And because that test has to be done by a certain type of lab, and the only lab that we have available is on California. And so that takes time and the delivery costs associated with that. There's the usual labor requirements for carrying out things and driving around. But right now, that is the primary concern and expense that we've been making right now. That's about it.
Representative Abasa, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmore. If you can expand on the wells where they were located. Thank you.
There's about 67 wells, as Jose was able to indicate. Basically, all the wells vary in concentrations. Some are high, some are low. That is why we have taken the time to identify 2 locations, primarily for measuring, because we are taking advantage of the blending of those wells, because by dilution, you are allowed to reduce that concentration to a point that hopefully achieves a reduction in the MCL or the advisory level. So on average, we are running, the last time we took a test, we were at 27 or 29 on the MCL level that we were measuring. Former wells. Oh, the levels that were in individual wells got as high as 1,300 concentration levels. So they were fairly high. Actually, we have some of the highest levels that are found in other places around the U.S. However, because of the efforts to reduce the pumping by turning off the wells, we were able to take advantage of how far the plume had extended. At that time, it was fairly concentrated. But now that we've had wells off for a time, that plume is now broadened. And so we're starting to see some gradual increase in concentrations as time goes by. However, now that we have the GAC units online, well, they're going to be online by the end of May, we should be able to stay ahead and below the MCO level that you're currently planning on establishing in this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmore. Yes, please.
You could please state your name and position for the record.
I'm Commander Travis Spaeth. I'm the Safe Drinking Water Manager at BECQ. To further elaborate on the contamination levels, as Mr. Gilmore recently stated, I do have charts of all the entry points that I can leave with you guys so you can see the history of these entry points. We don't track the wells as regularly, partly due to the fact that they are expensive tests and to run them multiple times per year, but we do test all the water that goes to the public on a quarterly basis, or CUC does, I should say. And so we've tracked that over time, and as he said, as we've shut off wells, the contaminants have dropped below the health advisory. And actually really only one entry point was historically above the health advisory. And now all entry points are below that. And we expect them to go even lower as they install more GAC filters out there in the system. So, but I can leave this with you. I think the highest now is around 35 parts per trillion. And there's 2 sites that are above that.
So we have, sorry if I may just ask, so there are more GAC units on the way that will be installed?
So they're hooking them up as we speak. I think they're going to get their second one online today is the plan. They got one online on Monday. So there's 10 units on an island, I believe. So they're hooking them up in succession. That should drastically reduce the PFAS because they're hooking them up to the more of the point loaded wells that were highest initially that have been shut off for a long time. So but they are actively resolving the problem.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add, Representative Abasa?
I do not.
Thank you. Representative McGlonan, did you have any questions for our panelists? I have a couple of questions. So do we have any idea about how long the exposure has been happening here, and is there any monitoring for long-term or short-term health effects in the community at this time?
I can elaborate with what I know. AFFF is very likely the cause of this. It was a firefighting foam used historically for many years. I think they quit using it in the mid-2000s here is what I'm told by airport staff. I don't know the validity of that, if that's CPA. This contaminant wasn't tested until the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule 3, which came out in 2015. So we don't know if it was there until 2015. Once we tested in 2015, it was very apparent there was a problem in some of these sites. They immediately shut down wells at the highest loading to try to keep water onto the public, yet reduce the contaminant levels. Long-term health effects. Due to the salinity of the water in this area, I don't think people drink a half a gallon of that water a day out of the tap. Do they drink some of it? Yes. The problem with PFAS is it bioaccumulates in people. So your body doesn't process it, is why the health advisory is so low. 70 parts per trillion is really, really small. Most contaminants would be measured in parts per million. Parts per trillion is a lot smaller. So we don't know, I guess, to be honest, but that's the history of it.
Okay, and just to go to the one half of my question was if there is going to be any monitoring for health effects with respect to this particular contaminant.
I don't know if there's a way to do that you could fully justify it only coming from the water. PFAS is used in your clothing, it's used in your pans, it's used in a lot of different materials that I don't think they realize the health effects. It's actually a very useful compound because it's so sturdy, right? But that's why they also call it the
forever chemical.
Forever chemical.
Right.
So I don't know how you could pinpoint it directly to water. I think the one thing Saipan has going for it is a lot of people don't drink water out of the tap. That being said, it still is advisable to fix the problem.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. And I wanted to clarify one other thing. So is the Commonwealth still using firefighting foam that contains PFAS? Or is there an equally effective alternative that is now being utilized by the agencies?
Well, no, it's not. No, they terminated the use of that damaging foam in 2005, and they've been using something else that has none of the contaminant concerns that we've been able to identify.
Okay.
So again, that may be something in the future, but right now there's no issue.
Okay, thank you for that. I have no further questions, colleagues, unless any of you do. Okay. Representative Ethel.
No questions for the panel, but maybe more when CHCC comes up for their presentation, because there's got to be some statistics of the area where the people were living in the south side of the island. So maybe if they have statistics with that, they can join in with the pursuit of ECQ and CHC in the future to get some collections and data for that, or the effects of our people here in the CNMI that have passed on with certain types of cancer. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ethel. Yes, Ms. Nelson.
And just to supplement, as far as the health impacts are concerned, as Assistant Attorney General Blades mentioned, there is ongoing litigation right now regarding against the manufacturers of these PFAS chemicals and AFFF firefighting foams. The outcome of that litigation would be an award of money to the CNMI that could be used for any purposes that the CNMI sees fit, including medical research, monitoring, whatever the CNMI deems appropriate to expend those funds for. The importance of this bill is it'll establish a maximum contaminant level that will allow the CNMI to pursue that litigation against the manufacturers and really assist with its ability to recover from the companies that produce these products. One of the allegations in the litigation is that the manufacturers knew there would be health effects and continued to manufacture these products without disclosing that information. And so the importance of the litigation or of the legislation is really to give the CNMI a cause of action in this litigation, allow it to recover money that can be used to further determine what health effects residents of the CNMI may see, and to allow BACQ to continue to establish protective levels for drinking water, and protect CUC from litigation for its mitigation measures to try and take action so far. The levels that we're seeing that are lower now, that are protective now, are due to CUC's mitigation and the expenses it's incurred so far.
Thank you. And just real quick, before, I know Mr. Gilmore and Mr. Moffitt want to add to that, but is there a deadline by which this lawsuit or this complaint must be amended to include the cause of action?
Yes. So currently there's 2 bellwether cases. It's right now the district court is looking at the water providers, but in the next few months they're going to be selecting the second round of plaintiffs, which would be the personal injury plaintiffs, including CNMI and a few other territories and states. So as soon as the judge rules on that, we would have maybe 30 days to amend the complaint to add on these causes of actions and the remedies.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moffitt and then Mr. Gilmore.
Chair, I'd just like to add as to the costs that CUC is incurring. Not only did it procure these GAC filters, but the costs are also continuing. Once these certain filters are, I guess, up to capacity, I'm not sure what's the right term for it, they are packaged and transported to California for rejuvenation and then transported back. These costs are not yet determined, as the GAC filters are new to Saipan, and it's not clear how often this process will take place, as it all depends on the filtration breakthrough. That's all I have to add.
Thank you. Mr. Gilmore, did you?
Oh, yeah, just to highlight his points. Just to highlight his points. The media has what it happens is this is organic and immediately attaches to the medium. And so it never lets go. So it will not have a problem. The situation is, as it deepens and gets as the pace of concentration develops, you measure as it goes down through the media, and then it hits the point of breakthrough. And at that point, that's when we switch and go the other direction, and we rely on the second duplex unit to now continue. That gives us time to make sure we can order backup or a new media supply to come in and then replace it. Then at that point, we replace the original one that already broke through and send it back for that rejuvenation. So again, we've only got a quote request out from the Calgon company. After that quote comes in, we'll then estimate what the delivery costs are. That will be tracked for backup concerns when we get to this legal issue in terms of reimbursement. Also, I wanted to add, just was concerned with comment about the tracking health conditions. Just keep in mind the equivalency of what you're dealing with. Think of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. We were dealing with 70 parts per trillion and about 7 drops put into that swimming pool. That, in your lifetime, that is about how much you'll drink. That is how much concentration at that level you're exposed to. Very low. It's extremely low. So the concern is if it's in a very concentrated form, and that's why taking those elements offline and not putting it in the water, as we have done so far, is helping us to protect that condition. But again, it's a very low concern right now, but again, it's very dangerous material.
Thank you all to our panelists. If I could ask those with written statements and supplemental materials, I think Commander Space, you mentioned you have some exhibits you'd like to share with the committee. If you could pass that over to, or Mr. Bond, if you could.
I got it.
Okay, Sergeant at Arms, thank you. Either way. Thank you. And at that time, thank you for your testimony and sending it to the full House for passage after this meeting. But yes, Mr. Gilmore.
I was going to offer some testimony myself after these guys got finished. I was going to offer some testimony myself after they were finished. So if that's still okay, I'd like to do that.
Sure, but I think if our other guests need to leave, you may step down from the chamber. You're welcome to stay in the gallery, though. Thank you. Mr. Gilmore, please proceed.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Madam Chair, and welcome to all of the rest of you members of the board, of the committee. Sorry. The executive director, Gary Camacho, gives his condolences since he is unable to attend this hearing due to his present medical plans that take him off island. I am William Gilmore, acting in the executive director's place, and I wish to thank you for this opportunity to speak to all of you about the formulation of a contaminant level that would set a standard for service that the Commonwealth Utilities Corporation would have to implement as an upper limit for the provision of potable water service to our customers with regard to PFOA, PFOS, and PFNA. I will not try and explain the long name of those. CUC is sensitive to the public's concerns with regard to addressing the issue of safe potable water, even though at present the water concerns may not meet the condition of being potable or Class 2 water. However, it is very important to assure the public that CUC is meeting its obligation to protect the public from contaminants that would potentially compromise their health, and this is the basis for the use of chlorine gas and hypochlorite tablets to eliminate pathogens from the water supply system. CUC first became aware of PFOA, PFOS in the water supply in 2015, which were found to be high at various entry points. When tested in June 2016, contaminant levels were found to be high in the Isley tank and its various wells, which were shut off. The EPA published an advisory level of 70 parts per trillion in the fall of 2016. Additional wells continued to be shut off, IF101, IF11. In 2017, when the contaminants were found to have increased following regular quarterly testing. This was also a decision made in 2017. Well, there was also a decision made in 2017 that we needed to identify a solution for removing this material. With 5 wells already offline, it was determined that we needed to reduce the testing to a more refined location so that we can monitor the value of blending that was occurring with multiple wells Pd1 Storage Tank. It was found that the blended contaminants at Estelaje and Isley storage tanks were well below the EPA advisory level of 70 parts per trillion. Plans proceeded to be put in motion to evaluate a solution to the contaminant, and the Calgon carbon system was found to be one of the leaders in the removal of this material. At the same time, Judge Carter of the Region 9 Federal Court told CUC to go farther in protecting the public by shutting out 10 additional wells that were the highest producing contaminant wells. We did, and this did produce some problems meeting supply needs, but it did serve to retain a testing level of less than 40 parts per trillion. As you may know, CUC has been working to acquire granular activated carbon filtration units from Calgon Carbon that have a proven system for handling the removal of this material that is approved by EPA. Presently, we are in the process of installing 10 duplex treatment units that operate in a sequential fashion, essentially 2 passes of the GAC meter before it is released to the distribution system. We expect to have all 10 units online by the end of May. In addition, CUC is working with the Economic Development Agency on EDA on phase 1 and 2 grant requests to acquire 2 fourplex systems and 4 additional duplex systems. The 2 fourplex units will be set up at the booster station 1 near the ARF facility and also at Isley Storage Tank. Once delivery and installation of the booster station 1 unit, which serves as Estelaje and the Canatabla areas, CUC will relocate 7 of the initial 10 units to be installed along the east end of the runway property, where we have additional wells that serve booster station 2, which also serves Dan Tank. The strength of the contaminant is very low at these sites, yet removal is imperative for us. The second fourplex unit will capture all of the water flow from wells in Ojan, Cogerville, and Escoto that supply the 1 million gallon tank at Isley Field. This serves the bulk of the southern portion of Saipan. As you may also know, CUC has been advertising a water advisory alert for the past year, recommending that customers in the affected areas not drink nor use it for cooking. Shortly, in the Astalahi and the Cunataba tank service areas, the advisory will be removed, and then the customers in those areas can go back to normal use of the water system. However, customers in the tank service areas served by the Isley tank will continue to be under the water advisory notice until the delivery of the new GAC equipment occurs. Presently, that may not be for 8 to 12 months, depending on when the EDA finalizes their determination of completion on the 2 grant submittals. Finally, with regard to the bill's acknowledgement of the extensive cost to manage, treat, extract, and dispose of the PFOS and PFOA material that has been imposed on CUC, and any and all efforts to rehabilitate groundwaters, surface waters, and lands of the Cmi, we endorse the bill's emphasis on bringing claims against and recovery from manufacturers, distributors, and marketing agents involved with those activities and benefited from them. In closing, CUC would like to thank the public for your patience, for handling the inconvenience of water supply as well as you have. We understand it's a challenge, but protecting the water supply is extremely important to us and for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmore. Please provide Sergeant-at-Arms with that written statement. And at this time, the floor is open for public comments on any other item on our agenda. Ms. Nava, could you guide our next guest? Thank you, Mr. Gilmore.
Getting too old.
Good morning, and please state your name and position for the record and proceed.
Okay. My name is Esther Escamilla, and I'm the Executive Director for the Healthcare Professional Licensing Board, and at the same time, I also serve for the Professional Licensing Board for the engineers. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of this prestigious committee on Health and Welfare Committee. I know this is not the first time that I appeared before. The board has been quite anxious in trying to get this proposed House bill. I take this opportunity to thank the committee and then, of course, BJ for picking up on the needs of the board in addressing this issue. First, House Bill 22-26 proposes to remove the term limitation for member boards to serve on the healthcare professions licensing. Currently, Public Law 15-105 can only serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms. The board just felt that by removing the term limitations for board members to serve, it does alleviate board members with institutional knowledge who have gained so much during the 4 years that they have served on the board to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the Commonwealth people, which is of paramount at the end of the day. Secondly, the rationale for this is really to maintain consistency among board members while they promulgate new regulations and process applications without having key individual members leaving during the process. I think that is very crucial in their duties to ensure that when new board members come in, it does take a while for them to find themselves quite equipped in evaluating and doing background checks, making sure that the regulations that they're looking at for the licensure of healthcare providers, especially more so as we are reviewing close to about a little over 30 now on these healthcare professions. It's not easy. We're beginning to get a little bit more challenged, particularly this last 2 years, as we get a lot of them also from foreign countries. It's either they're applying just to get licensed. And yet the board are not fully equipped in trying to evaluate whether the educational system does meet the U.S. standards. So we usually seek the Federation of State Medical Licensing Board to help us on this. And this does take time for board members. It's not an easy in trying to evaluate a lot of the applications that come in, but we have quite a few of them, and we want to retain this. The limitations of the board does not necessarily mean that they can serve until they retire. As their terms end in that 4 years, we'll continue to provide names for the governor's nominations, and it's up to him to nominate them, but it doesn't hinder anyone from, continuing to serve without the term limitations. And with this, we look forward that through your committee, you will be able to approve it and head on to having the House approved it also, so that we can be able to work in a much better place. Thank you. And I'm here to answer if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fleming. Colleagues, do you have any comments or questions for the director? Representative Mabata.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Fleming, for bringing this issue to our attention and for encouraging this body to act so that we can address the consecutive terms. Can you expand on helping us understand how often this issue occurs and how it impacts the board and then the agencies that that the board represents or makes decisions for?
Actually, this issue, since I came on board, I think we've gone through almost 3-4 rounds in the term that I have served as the executive director, and trying to go out and try to solicit for nominees for the governor's appointment. And those that are what we will call residents, whether they could be physicians, professional counselors, dentists, a lot of them that have been on island have served on the board. When I go around and I ask whether they want to come back, and they felt they're overwhelmed. They don't have the time. And so that makes it even harder, because I need to make sure that I need to find someone who will be here a little bit longer, and not someone who is here for 4 years working for the hospital or working for the private clinic. So it's not really easy. So by having these terms eliminated so that we can maximize those who are with us here and are willing to make this their home, that could really alleviate a lot of these issues that are coming. It worked very well with the professional licensing for the engineers, the architects, landscape. And that one, I saw it was one of the recommendations that I brought before the board, that maybe that could be one. And the governor, in that last meeting that I came here for, called me up and asked me that one of your board is due, and he goes, yes, but it's the end of her second term. She's a physician. I wish I can retain her, but I can't. So it was one of the recommendations of the board. Well, why just removed it like what you have for a PBL? And I think the island is kind of small. We are so limited in a lot of this specialized field that we can make it work by having them to stay on board until they're no longer able to provide the service.
Representative Mabata, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And can you just briefly explain the process of, I understand that we do have limited professionals on our island. I also do understand that many boards suffer from ineffective board members. And so if this, amendment were to pass, how would the board handle that process? Is there a process for reviewing board members, effectiveness, performance, etc.?
Just like any other boards and commissions that serve under the pleasure of the governor, they do have 4 terms. At the end of that 4 term, it's up to the governor to either appoint them, or I provide him with several lists of names for the vacancy, the profession that is vacant. They have to be taken, if they are inactive, they can only be taken down with cost. And that's as far as I know, that's the only way for us to do a process of eliminations for inactive board members. The statute provides for that.
Thank you, Mrs. Fleming. I yield. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Representative Abaza. If there are no further questions, colleagues? Thank you, Ms. Fleming, for your testimony. If you have any other materials you'd like to submit for the committee, please do so now. And thank you again for your testimony. The floor is open now for any other person who wishes to make comments.
All right, thanks.
Good morning. Please state your name and position for the record and proceed.
Good morning. My name is Doug Hardig. I'm the public defender for the CMI. And I wanted to thank the opportunity to come here to comment on House Bill 2214. Chairman Sablon, Representative Lavata, Representative Attal, Representative Mongolia, thank you for having us here. I'm also here with Vina Salim. She's an attorney in our office. She's very experienced in California, and she's been instrumental in helping me get some comments together, and I think she has some of her own. She is familiar with this issue, or at least with this particular bill, because it's modeled, or it's very similar to the one that's used in California. The Public Defender's Office is very much in support of creating programs that would address substance abuse, mental health issues, other issues that people have that come in contact with the criminal justice system. But this bill does have some major flaws and some major problems. And that's one of the problems occurs when legislation is taken from another jurisdiction where there are a lot of nuances that are not the same and things differ. For example, a couple of major problems. One is the distinction between jail and prison, which we don't have here, but they have in the States, and they definitely have in California. Another is the word parole. The word parole doesn't mean the same thing in two different places. It's very distinctive. And the way it's used in California is quite a bit different than it's used here. Certain states, Missouri, New York, I can go through a list that are very similar to Saipan, but California is not it. They use the word determinate sentence. There is no such thing in Saipan, so the whole thing sort of goes in diverging directions. One of the problems is with the jail prison distinction. This bill talks about when someone is brought to the DOC, they're evaluated for mental health issues, and if there is an issue, they're put in programs, they're put into a hospital wing, I guess is what it would be, of the DOC, but they're still at DOC. The thing of it is, in a jail situation, people are there held pre-trial. That means they haven't been convicted of anything, or maybe they've been convicted of a minor offense and they're going to do a few weeks or a few months in jail on some sort of misdemeanor, disturbing the peace, something like that, misdemeanor theft, stealing a small amount. They would then be released after weeks or months. Here, if they're evaluated, then they have to go to this program. And what do you do with someone who's now supposed to be out of jail, but they're still in jail because they're in this mental health ward, and they shouldn't even be in jail at all? Another problem is with the pretrial, like I just mentioned. What do you do with that person who's then been evaluated and they're put in this lockdown situation, and then they post bail? They have to be released, or their case is dismissed. Cases are dismissed without a finding of guilt all the time for a variety of reasons. So now this person is no longer under the jurisdiction of DOC, but they're being held for 60, 90 days, maybe longer, in the DOC. Another issue, as I mentioned before, is this definition of parole. In California, a person serves a certain amount of of time in prison. Now we're talking about convictions now. Someone who's been convicted of a crime, and more likely than not, a very serious crime. So the person is convicted and they get a determinate sentence. They serve that sentence. After that sentence is done, they're on parole. If while on parole, they need mental health treatment, the Department of Parole can then have them involuntarily committed as part of their parole to a mental health facility, which is not under the Department of Corrections in California, it's under the Department of Mental Health. So a parolee is now in the mental health department getting treatment as a condition of parole. Here, if they go back to DOC, so now they're on parole, but they're in prison. Those two are hard to reconcile. Another difference is here, our parole is merit-based. You don't do a certain amount of time and then get paroled. You do a certain amount of time, you may never make parole. So for example, if someone is sentenced to prison for 5 years, they may be a very model prisoner. After 2 years, they could go before the parole board. There's a hearing, the parole board decides that it's okay, they can be paroled, and go out back into the community. Now they're on parole. They could also be a situation where a person goes before the parole board after 2 years on a 5-year sentence, and the parole board denies them parole. They're not worthy for whatever reason of going out into the community, so they stay in prison. They might stay in prison for the entire 5 years. They're never deemed worthy to go out in the community, but eventually they do their time, they go out. They would not have access under this system because they're not on parole. So you have a situation where someone who is out and needs help but is not on parole, another situation where someone is on parole but they're actually in the prison, because they could have a situation where the parole board says, okay, 2 years is up, you've got this 5-year sentence, we're going to parole you, we're going to parole you to this mental health facility. So now they're, in one sense, they've been released from prison, but physically they're still in prison. Now comes another problem. They're in that mental health facility in the prison, and there's a problem. They create a disturbance, they violate the conditions of parole. You see, when you're on parole, you have to follow certain rules. So the example is they're in the mental health facility, in the prison, on parole, even though they're on parole, they're not out. There's a problem. The parole board convenes and they say, we're going to take away your parole. They go back into the prison. Now their time passes and their time to get released again. How much time have they served? Let's say a year from that initial parole date. Have they served 3 years? Because they spent 2 years in prison, then 1 more year in the detention center. Is that 3 years? Or is that only 2 years? Because they spent 2 years in prison, then they're out on parole, even though physically they're back in the prison. What has happened to that person? It is very, very unclear. So the real problem here, I think, is what's the meaning of parole? And it doesn't mean the same thing that it means in California. And the prison jail distinction, what do you do with people who would be put in these services because they're at the DOC, but if you follow the California model, they've never been to prison. They shouldn't even be there because they're in jail, and they should have been released because after several weeks or months, someone on their behalf either posted bail, or they had a small sentence and it ran out, or the case was, for whatever reason, dismissed. So there is some of the problems. This also seems to alleviate a problem that really isn't there. Under 6 CMC 4252, that's the parole section. If a person on parole becomes unsafe to themselves or others, the parole board, the parole officer, could file a motion and have them committed civilly to a confined mental health facility. That apparently isn't done often here because there is no facility. The solution would be, I think, is to have a facility at CHCC, not at DOC, Because even under this bill, it would be administered and regulated and so forth by CHCC. That should not be at DOC for some of the reasons I just mentioned. Another thing I'd point out is people that would fall under this statute, people who would need this kind of how would I put it, treatment or this sort of a plan, it's extremely few. And we're talking about a lot of infrastructure here for extremely few number of people. Now, that doesn't mean I think people should be ignored just because there aren't very many of them. But if someone under this plan is applying for parole, they're going to have to be seen after they've been put into the mental health treatment ward. They'd have to then be seen by 2 doctors who agree. If those 2 don't agree, they hire a 3rd and a 4th, and whichever 2 those 2 agree to, that's the decision, he's out or he's in. So now we're up to 4 psychiatrists. We don't have 1 forensic psychiatrist on island now. We're going to go from 0 to 4 in order to implement this. It seems like where we're talking about such small numbers of people, the resources would be better if those psychiatrists or psychologists are actually at CHCC and they do this along with their other duties at CHCC. I can't think of, I was spent last night trying to think of who this applies to, a specific person, a name. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know quite a few people involved in the criminal justice system. No names come to mind. So I'm not quite sure who this is directed to. One name, one face jumps out at me who comes close, but he is serving a 30-something year sentence. So he's still got 10 more years before this is even an issue. And even then, I think what will happen is, assuming he finishes his sentence, which I believe to be 30 years, he'll get out and he won't have parole. So none of this will actually work for him. And I can only think of the one person. Now, there's a lot of other people who have mental health issues that should be addressed. And I think something could and should be done. I know that the courts are looking at a mental health court, which would gear people with mental health issues that contribute to their criminal behavior, and they could get counseling and treatment and all that as parts of probation, similar to the drug court program, which is working really pretty well. But I think that would be a better a step in a better direction, not to have a certain cell block, which is I think what this would permit. A certain cell block where a couple doctors visit once in a while, and the fact of the matter is, on a daily basis, what we've got is people are still in prison while they're on parole, which doesn't make sense. Another thing here is, again, as I think I mentioned this already, but if someone is not fit to be paroled for whatever reason, the parole board can deny them parole, make them stay at DOC in order that they be evaluated and seen by CHCC if there is such a person. The problem again is that that person doesn't exist. There's a lack of mental health care people here.
Mr. Hardick, thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off. I understand you will be submitting written comments
Yes.
as well. And so we will look forward to accepting that. But just in the interest of time, I know we do have others that are waiting to testify. Ms. Salim, did you want to add to that at this point? And we are asking for oral statements to be limited to 3 minutes or less.
Sure, I can make a brief statement.
Sure, thank you.
So my name is Dina Selam. I'm an assistant public defender here in Saipan, and I was a public defender in Oakland, California prior to coming here. So when I saw the proposed bill, it did jump out at me as being very similar to something we have in California. Doug already talked about how the system there is very different. And so I do think as far as the second part of the bill goes that pertains to how to treat someone who gets out on parole, it's going to have to be looked at that the definition of parole here is substantially different from what there is in California. And also the bill sort of assumes a level of infrastructure that we simply don't have in place here in the Santa Monica. We don't have a single inpatient mental health facility even outside of the jail. This bill is imagining an inpatient facility that exists outside of the jail as well as one that exists inside of the jail. And at this point, we don't have either of those. So I would think, one of the things we talked about was we're fully in support of there being more mental health services available to all of our clients, including those that are in DOC. But perhaps the focus should be more on actually getting those mental health professionals here first, whether they work for CHC and then consult with DOC, or whether we can actually have a separate person in DOC and one or two at CHC. Those would both be possible, but I think that's something that needs to be addressed first before the scope of the bill that's being proposed, particularly in regards to the parole part. There is the initial portion of the bill, which I think Mr. Hardig talked a little bit less about, but just the proposal to establish a mental health unit in the jail. And part of what's proposed includes substance abuse programming, alcohol abuse programming, general services. I think there was also a mention of library and access to education. Those things are sorely lacking in DOC here, and those we would be fully in support of having our clients be able to have access to those things. And maybe that could also be a starting point to focus more on what treatment options are available or can be made available in DOC first, and then to move towards figuring out how can those be extended to someone who might be getting released on parole, which again, Mr. Hardig mentioned is a very small number of people. And here, because of the way that parole works, it's completely discretionary to the parole board. So the parole board can choose to deny parole to someone that they feel is a danger to society. So a lot of this just doesn't really come into play very often. If they think that someone is a danger to society still, they can choose to keep them in DOC rather than having to rush and figure out, can we get them in an inpatient mental health program? The reason why this statute exists in California is because parole is most of the time not discretionary. Someone's sentence ends and they automatically get placed on parole without ever going in front of a parole board. So in those situations, it makes sense to try to figure out how can we keep treatment for those people, because they have to be released out into the community. So let's try to make sure that they keep getting treatment, but that's not really our system here. That's probably already 3 minutes, so that'll be my comments for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Salim. And if you have written comments as well that you'd like to submit to the committee, you can do so. I think we agreed on May 21st as being the deadline to submit any additional written statements on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardig. Thank you, Ms. Salim. At this time, the floor is open for any other public comments.
Good morning, members. Thank you for having me. My name is Caitlin Nisus. I'm the Special Assistant for Policy, Sustainability, and Development at the CHCC. I wasn't going to speak about this today, but we did already submit written comments. I just wanted to maybe make them known to everyone about the CHC's position on House Bill 2214. We at the CHCC believe strongly that access to mental health services and other health services are essential tools for well-being and can enable offenders to engage in activities which help them to stop offending. However, House Bill 2214 imparts an undue responsibility on the CHCC for providing these services to offenders who are in the care of the Department of Corrections. The CHCC is in favor of the DOC establishing a mental health unit, or as the public defenders very well stated, more likely or better mental health services rather than a unit. However, we respectfully request that your committee strike all references to the CHCC in the bill to make clear that this responsibility remains with the Department of Corrections. The 16th seat of my legislature created the CHC to be independent, noting in a committee report on the creation of the CHCC that, quote, attention must be given to revamp CHC's operational system based on business principles that emphasize efficiency and optimal performance, and that provide incentives to achieve self-sufficiency. Central to these reform efforts and to the CHCC's transformation into a self-sufficient governmental institution is the delinking of CHCs from political and fiscal controls that govern most departments and agencies. CHC will continue to require government subsidy, particularly for indigent and medical referrals. We've been working hard to operate according to business principles while maintaining our obligation to public welfare, and have focused requests to the legislature for general fund appropriations only on subsidies needed for indigent care that we provide, including reimbursement for the Medicaid local share and medical referral expenses. The Department of Corrections is welcome to avail of all services that the CHCC already provides to the public, and the Department of Corrections is welcome to pursue a services contract with the CHCC to provide additional services tailored specifically to the needs of the Department of Corrections. Expenses of contracted services provided by the CHCC ought to be budgeted for by the Department of Corrections in their annual appropriations. Thank you very much for your thoughtful consideration of our input.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nises. And we do have CHCC's written comments, colleagues, that was sent earlier in your packets. At this time, are there any other comments? Mr. Camacho, welcome. Please state your name and position for the record.
Thank you and good morning, members of this committee.
If you could, sorry, Mr. Camacho, just turn on your microphone, please. Thank you.
My name is Ramon Camacho, known as RV. Yes, I'm a member of the Cmi Board of Parole. I've been there for 17 years. So I've been in the criminal justice for a total of 37 years. During these numbers of years in the criminal justice, you know, I only see one that is deal with mental issue that cannot be entertained at the Department of Correction. I think, you know, we have a two good agency here. One is the court, and the other one is the hospital, the mental ward, the community guidance center. We have Dr. Glenna George there. She's doing an excellent job. And the other thing is that the government created this HOPE program for the drugs addicts, and it's working. I can attest it. I have a couple of parolees that we refer them. Some of them are inpatient, outpatient on the HOPE program, and the result is positive. You know, we never had this recidivism. Minor, yes, infraction out of the 10, 1. Then we refer again back on these things. I think what we really need, you know, Cmi is, this is too costly to build that mental health residential unit in the prison. Prisons are people with problems. Anything that deal with serious mental issue, let's refer to appropriate agency. Doctors, nurses up there, the mental wards are well trained. Officers in the correction are not trained to deal with that. What I really like to see is, let's have these psychiatrists, psychologists down at the prison. And these two professionals can take care of two. One is the officers, one is the prisoners. This is what we need. Now on the parole issue, yes, individuals that got sentenced by the court and says, okay, 1/3 served out of the 5 years, you're eligible to apply for parole. What really the parole as a board member really looking into that is the report from the prison. Because as a board member, I'm outside the prison, I'm not seeing inside the prison. So the best is the prison officers, the officers in there, to give us the report. What we're really looking at on the parole is the conduct in prison. If he's not behaving, he's not following anything, you know, it worries me to make vote for grant, to put him out in the community. But he had this good conduct. Now these individuals in jail for drug issue, and we decided to grant for parole, we refer them to HOPE program and go furthermore. But the lacking on the Department of Correction is rehabilitation. That is the best one, and it's lacking rehabilitation. Numerous cases that, you know, been sentenced without a parole before they eligibility to be parole, and that's very scary. What I'm saying is very scary is this individual, for example, been sentenced for 10 years without eligibility for parole. So he stayed there for 10 years in the dark. And when he exhausted that 10 years, the minute he stepped out from the prison, saw this bright light, become colorblind, doesn't know where to go because there's no guide. But the parole, it's a supervision, it's a transition out to the society. Yes, released from the prison, but supervised by the parole. So this is what we're doing. The officers of the parole, the chief of the parole, we impose conditions. on the release. Of course, no alcohol for the duration of the parole. Find job, go to this program. If it's a drug related, go to HOPE. Resolving that, forward over to the chief of parole, so they continue to supervise this individual, get a job. Parolees, we have a parolee success report. A murder parolee that is under parole, just graduate, EMT, and that's a success of parole. I have a parolee down on the Parole Plan, supervisor. So the parole is doing good in this within the criminal justice. But our concern as the parole member is we need to put help in the Department of Correction. Rehabilitation is lacking. Not to put in a mental residential in the correction. There's an agency that can handle that, more professionals, that's their job, being trained. If there's anything, put insulin to this individual to calm down. Police officers in the correction, it's not qualified. It's not been trained. They're trained to supervise, monitor, guide these individuals, but not as a nurse position. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Camacho. This time, are there any others who wish to make public comments? Okay. Now, is there anybody else on the list? Okay. Thank you very much, members of the gallery who have made your public statements. There will still be opportunity to submit your written statements to the chair. Those can be emailed or provided to our legislative assistant and will be incorporated into the committee report. Thank you, colleagues. And just moving on with our agenda, we are actually right on time. So next on our agenda is reviewing the legislation for markup today. Colleagues, please take note, we have 5 bills that have been referred to this committee for review. We have also received, prior to today, written comments from the following agencies: the Office of the Attorney General on Senate Bill 2240 regarding PFAS contamination, from the Mayor of Saipan on House Bill 2223 regarding confinement of dogs, from the Department of Corrections, the Commonwealth Healthcare Corporation, and the Division of Youth Services on House Bill 2214 regarding mental health services at corrections. And DYS has also commented on House Bill 2215 regarding the foster care sponsorship program. These comments have been emailed to all of you. But for today, colleagues, we'll be focusing our review and market primarily in House Bill 2226 and Senate Bill 2240. We are still awaiting additional comments on the remaining bills on our agenda, and some agencies have requested additional time or suggested that we submit comments from other agencies. So let's begin with House Bill 2226. Are there any other comments, questions, or amendments from the members? No comments or I actually did just have minor amendments to clarify the findings. And so if I could just, with your indulgence, members, just read this into the record. On page 2, starting on line 9, those sentences should read, "This requirement hinders the progress of the HCPLB because of the relatively small pool of healthcare professionals available and willing to serve, and the time it takes to identify, appoint, and confirm and train new appointees. In removing the term limitation, board members who are willing to serve can be allowed to continue their work, and the HCPLB can save valuable resources that would otherwise be spent on recruiting and training new appointees, period." And I can provide the amended language to the legislative assistant to incorporate into the amendment, but I so move. Second. Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All in favor of adopting the motion, please say aye. Aye. Motion carried. So this bill is now House Bill 2226, HD1. Are there any other amendments or comments at this time? Ready? Can I have a motion to approve the adoption of this bill, 2226 HD1, and send to our legislative assistant to draft the committee report.
So,
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Okay, the motion carries. So House Bill 2226 HD1 has been approved for passage by the committee, and legislative assistant, if you could, Mr. Vaughn, if you could please prepare the committee report. Second on our agenda is Senate Bill 2240. Are there any comments, questions, or amendments from the members? Ready? Ready, okay. Well, all in favor of the motion to, or may I have a motion to adopt SB 2240 in its present form? Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Okay, and Ms. Claire, if you could please prepare the report, inclusive of the comments that we have received for both reports today and prior to today. And I am anticipating one more comment that a public health graduate student will be submitting on SB 2240. That should be coming in the next few days, but we can attach that to the committee report. Okay, and now we are going to take a short 10-minute break. We'll be back at 10:30.
Sure, before we move on with that, can we have a motion that we include that the comment submitted to 22-40?
Oh, sure.
So that the committee is well aware and the general public doesn't question the committee report with that additional information.
Sure.
No objection.
No objection. Would you like to make the motion?
Sure, so move.
Second. Okay, motion has been made and seconded to incorporate comments received today and after today into the committee report for SB 2240. And I would say also if there are any other comments, I haven't received any notice from anybody, but for 2226 as well. Please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Ms. Claire, please take this. Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute break, colleagues. We'll come back at 10:30, and CHCC representatives here, if you could please come up, and we'll get you set up for your presentation. And we are back from our recess. So colleagues and members of the viewing public, at this point in our agenda, we will be receiving presentations from the Commonwealth Healthcare Corporation. And as I mentioned earlier, CEO Esther Munia has notified us that she will not be here today due to a conflicting board meeting at CHCC, as well as this drill at the airport that she has to be at. But we have the very capable Ms. Caitlin Nieces here. She'll begin with this presentation on universal health insurance, and then we'll invite Ms. Eleanor Cabrera up to give her presentation on the prescription drug monitoring program. And Representative Miguel, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, sorry, right, before we go into the presentation, I just want to point out for House Bill 22-23, did you solicit comments to, and if not, maybe something you can consider, to Rhode Department of Land and Natural Resources? Because right now the current Rhode local law, which establishes the dog program, puts DLNR as the responsible entity, and so if we can get their comments as well, yeah, maybe they can provide some inputs to whether this is something that should stay with DLNR or the mayor's office.
Yeah, thank you, Representative McGuinty. That's a great point. We did solicit comments from the mayor's office, but we will go ahead and send a request to DLNR too. Thank you. Okay, and with that, I think we are ready to begin. So Ms. Nieces, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, members, for requesting that we do this put this report together and look into this issue. It's an issue that's very important to the CHCC. Anything that has to do with healthcare financing and the CNMI is of utmost importance to us. So again, my name is Caitlin Nieces. I'm the Special Assistant for Policy, Sustainability, and Development at the Commonwealth Healthcare Corporation. I'm going to start talking about today. I'm just going to start at the beginning about some basics about health insurance, the CNMI healthcare landscape, and then go from there about the impacts that health insurance can have on healthcare access, and also the uninsured population in the CNMI, what we know about the uninsured population, and then go into different options for expansion with different considerations. There are many different decisions that could be made, which would alter the course of, or alter the design, alter the reach, alter the cost. There's lots of different considerations. So unlike other Pacific Island countries, which typically finance their healthcare service delivery through domestic general government expenditures, the CNMI follows the U.S. system of healthcare financing through mixed public and private, for-profit, nonprofit providers. So there's the medical care providers on one side, they're for-profit and nonprofit, and then there's the payers on the other side, which are nonprofit, public, and for-profit. So there's a mix of different players in here. In other Pacific Island countries, when they typically refer to, so basically us and Guam are following the same system as the U.S. In other countries, they refer to healthcare coverage. They mean actually the service delivery of the government, the public service delivery, and not necessarily health insurance. So when we say healthcare coverage, we mean insurance. They mean actual access to care. So this is a breakdown of the healthcare landscape. We have payers on the left, public and private, and then providers on the right, which are also public and private. We have in the public payer landscape, we have Medicaid, Medicare, TRICARE, and the VA, and then the medical referral program, which is administered locally using local funds. And all of those payers, with the exception of the medical referral program, are subject to federally established standards to different degrees. And then the private health insurance is group plans, which are employer-sponsored, and individual plans, which have no contribution from an employer. And these are subject to both CNMI laws and federal laws, and they're regulated primarily by the CNMI Department of Commerce. For providers, obviously in the public sphere, we have Commonwealth Healthcare Corporation. In the private, we have 6 different private health clinics, optometry practices, laboratories, dental, pharmacies, dialysis, and then all the off-island providers of the CNMI medical referral program. And the professionals in the CNMI are regulated by the Healthcare Professionals Licensing Board, and the prescription practices by the Drug Enforcement Agency. And then all healthcare facilities are subject to local laws and sanitation. And then the CHCC as a hospital is also subject to conditions or participations for hospitals with CMS, which is Medicaid, Medicare services. So for the payers, we have Medicare, which covers U.S. citizens and permanent residents who are 65 years and older, or younger people with disabilities, and also people who have end-stage renal disease. This covers about 2,700 CNMI residents today. End-stage renal disease is a huge problem in the CNMI, and it's increasingly so. This is largely due to diabetes and hypertension. Medicaid covers U.S. citizens and permanent residents who meet income and assets eligibility requirements. Currently, nearly 33,000, yes, I said 1,000, CNMI residents as of February are covered, but typically Medicaid only covers around 15,000 residents. Presumptive eligibility expanded Medicaid to about 15,000 additional residents, and I'll talk a little bit about presumptive eligibility later. So in the CNMI, health insurance is like a ticket to healthcare. It's really difficult to afford healthcare anywhere, and the CNMI included, without health insurance. National studies on insurance status and engagement in the health system note that uninsured individuals are more likely to avoid or delay seeking care, and this creates worse health problems down the road. So this graph is taken from data in the 2016 NCD survey. We are conducting another survey this year, so we'll be able to have some trend data on this. This, I broke down the avoidance, adults reported avoidance of care due to cost based on their insurance status. So on the left, you can see that insured adults report that 11% avoided care due to cost in the last year, whereas the uninsured, 28% of them reported avoiding care due to cost. And although utilization of healthcare is not necessarily an indicator of better health outcomes, that's a tricky one right now, especially with chronic disease. It's difficult to see the outcomes right away when it comes to better health access. But we know that the impact of healthcare coverage on health outcomes may differ based on the reason for accessing care. So when we look at the impact of health insurance on outcomes, the Institute of Medicine concluded in 2002 that across various patient health condition types, insured patients generally fared better. So for example, and it's written more in depth in the paper, but patients who have cancer or patients who need urgent care fare better when they have health insurance. So patients with chronic conditions, we don't necessarily see the outcomes very quickly. So like diabetes, hypertension, we don't necessarily see those positive health outcomes very quickly when they have health insurance versus when they don't. But conditions that require urgent care or very expensive care, it certainly improves their outcomes. So according to the 2016 NCD survey, just over 3 in 5 CNMI adults reported not getting an annual checkup in the previous year. Nearly 1 in half of CNMI adults perceive their health to be only fair or poor, and nearly 1 in 2, 1 in 2, I said 1 in half. 1 in 2 CNMI adults did not have any form of health insurance. So in 2016, we were looking at an almost 50% uninsured rate. In the US, for comparison, it's about 8 to 10% uninsured right now, and maybe even lower than that by this point. So who are the uninsured? So we wanted to look at the data and really understand who this uninsured population is in order to figure out, how do we design a program to make sure that we're covering all these people who don't have insurance. So we used the factors of uninsurance identified by the Institute of Medicine Committee on the Consequences of Uninsurance as a framework. So a lot of this research that I reference is a little bit old because the Affordable Care Act kind of changed the game in the U.S. healthcare landscape. So uninsured issues are not as prevalent, so they're not as researched. But it's still valid to look at these social and economic factors. So we looked at work status. People who were out of work and looking, self-employed and employed for wages were most likely to be uninsured. So 65% of people who were out of work but looking for work were uninsured. This is according to the NCD survey data again. 58% who were self-employed were uninsured, and 49% of adults who were employed for wages were uninsured as well. So we might expect that people who don't have jobs would be more likely to be uninsured, but that's not really the case in the CNMI. Also, we looked at family income. So up to $15,000 a year, and $15,000 to $30,000 were 60% and 44% uninsured respectively. So we would expect that lower income families are going to be, have higher uninsured rates, and that's the case. Everyone says, oh, what about Medicaid? They come to non-citizens and permanent, to U.S. citizens and permanent residents who have had that status for five or more years. And we also looked at educational attainment. So less than ninth grade education had the highest uninsured rate at 50%, but not far behind were adults with a bachelor's degree. So adults with a bachelor's degree were almost as highly uninsured as adults who had less than ninth grade education. And looking at age, 52% of 35 to 49-year-olds were uninsured, followed closely by 50 to 64-year-olds at 51%. So immigrant status, 71% of temporary residents did not have health insurance. This one stands out the most starkly. And if we look at the other indicators, like family income, work status, educational attainment, they all share high rates of temporary residents in those groups as well. So they cut across these different categories. And then furthermore, ethnicity, 63% of all Filipinos were uninsured and 64% of all other Asian ethnicities were uninsured. This is followed by other Pacific Islander ethnicities at 52% uninsured. So it's listed out in the report that we'll be submitting next week. We just wanted to make sure the board had the final approval on that report that will be submitted next week. The report shows that 25% of Chamorros are uninsured and about 7% of any other ethnicities are uninsured. So there's huge disparities in insurance status based on based on ethnicity. And then gender, there wasn't a huge difference. 50% of men were uninsured as opposed to 44% of women. So when we look at the uninsured, we're really looking at people with temporary resident status. So permanent residents, about half are uninsured. The uninsured is in the orange. 71% of temporary residents are uninsured, and then 27% of U.S. citizens are uninsured. And this is just a breakdown by work status. And in the report, we have an appendix with all of the breakdowns of the factors that I just went over. Employed for wages is, like, as you can see, 49% uninsured. Self-employed is 58%. Out of work looking is 65%. Out of work not looking is 47%. Homemakers, 30%. Retired, 19%. And unable to do work is 23%. So I think this is probably an indicator that our public assistance programs are working. So people who are retired, disabled, they choose to be out of the workforce because they're taking care of children at home or taking care of the home, are able to avail of either, their spouse's insurance through an employer or Medicaid or Medicare. But then these people who are employed, self-employed, are not being protected. In 2018, the Cmi Medicaid program covered roughly 31% of the Cmi population, and enrollment in the Medicaid and CHIP program increased dramatically following the declaration of a public health emergency last year, and the program rules established by the CMS for presumptive eligibility. The total number of both Medicaid and CHIP and PE enrollment has led to an increase in the covered Medicaid population to 32,638, that's as of February, representing roughly 63% of the CMI population. That is one of the highest insured rates that we probably will have ever seen in the Commonwealth. Between Medicaid and private insurance, we probably have the highest coverage right now. But that's not going to last forever. You can see in this graph, so the line in the middle represents just regular, typical Medicaid enrollment. And you can see it went up a little bit in 2021, but really the dramatic increase is the presumptive eligibility, which is the yellow line at the bottom, really contributed to the bulk of the increase in Medicaid enrollment. So why is this? Why are we seeing such huge rates of Medicaid enrollment now? The PE eligibility assessment looks only at a patient's income, not their immigration status. So this PE eligibility during the public health emergency is blind to immigration status, and that's great for non-citizens. Given the fact that many non-citizens in the CNMI did not have insurance and lived on exceptionally low incomes prior to the pandemic, it's highly likely that the increased Medicaid enrollment is representative of needs in the community which were already present pre-pandemic. So this is similar to our typing experiences. that the pandemic has merely exposed underlying socioeconomic disparities, which were already present before the public health emergency. Sorry, that's a duplicate. And so I wanted to point out that when we have better healthcare financing, we get better services. So this is a very simplified breakdown just to show you the association between reimbursement and services. So the green line represents the Medicaid reimbursement, and this is just the federal share to the CHCC. Like we always talk about, we don't get the local share. But because of different congressional actions, the typhoon, the pandemic, we're seeing a higher reimbursement from the federal share of Medicaid. So the green line shows that from 2017 to 2020. And the blue line is the CNMI's medical referral program, referrals off island for oncology, surgery, and ENT. Since 2017, we've been able to bring on an oncologist, an orthopedic surgeon, and an ENT. And guess what? Referrals for these services dropped dramatically. So these things are related. Being financed properly gives us better capacity on island. So for private health insurance, the CNMI has 5 licensed health insurance carriers competing in the private market. We all know them. The overall premium written against the 5 for the year 2019 was roughly $49.4 million, with incurred claims registering at about $37.8 million, with a net gain of about $10.6 million on overall earned premium. And that data is taken from the CNMI Insurance Commissioner's report for 2019, sorry. The average premium per covered life in 2019 was about $1,330. And this is roughly an 18% increase from the average premium per covered life in 2018, which was $1,125. So this is all data taken from the CNMI Insurance Commissioner's reports, which are publicly available online. We can see that, so this is the estimated claim cost per covered life by different health insurance markets. So you can see, and I don't know how to explain these dips and these trends, but you can see they kind of follow similar market patterns in all the different markets, from individual, small, and large group. So in 2016, there's our starting point. There's a slight increase in some of the markets, and then a decrease, and then an increase in the claim costs. Again, I don't have the explanation, but just to show you that these are the claim trends. And the covered life is anyone who's covered under a plan, so it could be the primary or the dependents. It's just all covered lives. And then for the Cmi Government Plan, the largest private plan in the CNMI, the plan covered 7,357 people in 2020. This is slightly higher from the 7,300 people in 2019. The average age of membership was about 40 years old. And the most common claims for CNMI Government Plan members were, in order, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and diabetes. Hyperlipidemia just means there's too much fat in the blood. The total medical and pharmacy claims paid in 2020 for this plan was a little over $26 million, or an average of about $3,600 per member. So that's pretty high. At the federal level, there have been many laws passed to fill gaps in health insurance access. So this is a problem that the U.S. has been trying to solve, basically with Band-Aids. So the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, and the Health Insurance Private Protection and Portability Act. These are all explained more or summarized in the paper. But just for your knowledge, the U.S. government hasn't been very good at solving this problem either, in terms of patchworking the private market. The passage of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, PPACA, otherwise known as Obamacare, in 2010, pursued a more aggressive strategy to expand access, but focused largely on bolstering the private health insurance markets while expanding regulatory standards and encouraging states to expand eligibility for Medicaid. So basically what PPACA did was say, okay, private industry, we're going to make you do more things, better benefits, open enrollment. You have to, play better for consumers. On the other side, we're going to mandate everyone to buy insurance to balance out the market. There were other mechanisms at play to kind of stabilize the market, but it was really about bolstering the private insurance market and then also expanding Medicaid. So in the CNMI, a historical lack of funding has severely limited the CNMI Department of Commerce Division of Insurance in its regulatory capacity. And the last, I mean, as far as I'm aware, there's still just one full-time employee in the Division of Insurance overall, and that's for all lines of insurance, not just health insurance. Health insurance is a very complex thing to regulate. The insurance code has largely gone unchanged since it was originally passed in 1983. Only 3 laws have amended the code, and only 2 have addressed health insurance specifically. Diabetes coverage is the only state-mandated health insurance benefit in the CNMI. So in summary, there's very little in regards to health insurance regulation currently. In February 2013, Public Law 1792 was passed, which released employers from the mandatory provision of health coverage to non-US qualified workers, or CWs. And like I said before, now we see in 2016 that 71% of temporary resident adults do not have insurance. This is more than double the uninsured rate of US citizen adults in the CNMI, which is 27%. Also, something that has been notable in the CNMI healthcare landscape is the reorganization of the Department of Public Health into the CHCC as an autonomous public corporation intended to be financially self-sufficient healthcare institution that would rely primarily on its fees and charges to fund operations. So this quote I took directly from the, I love looking at old committee reports, so I appreciate all the work that you guys do. Directly from the committee report, which contributed to the creation of the CHCC. And it writes, the public corporation, they call it CHC, will continue to require governmental subsidy, particularly for indigent care and medical referrals. These appropriations will be needed until the CNMI enacts a comprehensive healthcare financing system, such as universal mandatory minimum health insurance coverage for all CNMI residents. So the legislature knew back in the team legislature that we were going to have to solve this financing problem. It saw it coming. And today, or at least in 2018, which is the most recent data that I have on billing, the payer mix was 30% self-pay. Self-pay patients either don't have any insurance or have a significant portion of their bill due as co-insurance or co-pay. Medicaid was 33%, private health insurance was 25%, and Medicare was 12%. So that's our payer mix. It doesn't necessarily reflect our reimbursements that we get from those groups, but that's our share of the market, or of the different markets. And last March, we put together a brief employer health benefit survey, which was shared to members of the Saipan Chamber of Commerce and on our Facebook page. Only 15 employers, and mostly small ones, responded to the survey, but it's better than nothing. 73% of respondents reported that they do offer health insurance benefits. And of those that did not offer health insurance, most of them listed cost as the main factor for not offering insurance. And one reported that their major barrier was the complexity of health insurance and the difficulty in choosing a plan. And then so of the employers who reported offering health insurance, employers estimated spending anywhere from $500 per year per employee to more than $5,000 per year per employee. So there's a huge range of different types of health insurance plans out there on the market, and what employers are offering in terms of their share as well. 70% of these respondents reported their premium was affordable, and 60% rated the quality of their health insurance as excellent. And this is a breakdown of what do you think is a fair employee-employer cost share for health insurance premiums. You can see that the majority at 53% reported that a 25% employee and 75% employer cost breakdown was fair. I was fairly surprised to see this, but I think that's a fairly generous employer contribution. In orange is 50% employer, 50% employee, and in blue is 0% employee and 100% employer. So generally employers are willing to contribute, I mean, as far as the respondents to the survey, are willing to contribute to a health insurance plan. But they need, okay, so here's the good side. This is what they say would be most helpful to encourage them to continue to sponsor health insurance if they're already doing so, or to offer health insurance if they're not. Most responded, and they were able to choose all that apply. So most responded that lower premiums would definitely be helpful. The second most popular was an easier way to shop for a health plan, so they don't want to have to deal with the market and calling different insurance companies and looking through different plans. Tied for third is a tax credit or tax deduction and benefits packages that are easier to understand. And one responded that nothing. I guess they're fine. So regardless of the pathway, so we'll talk about pathways to universal health insurance now, but regardless of the pathway, special attention should be paid to ensuring that the plan offers affordable premiums, that presents benefits information in a way that is easy to understand for patients, explains any patient cost sharing responsibilities clearly and simply, requires a low deductible, if any, and offers full coverage at no cost sharing of preventive care alongside a comprehensive benefits package which considers needs for the whole health of a person, including mental health, dental, and vision care. And those are recommendations based on research that went into the Affordable Care Act and research since then about really, what helps enable care. And something that I didn't put in these slides, but it's in the paper, is just talking about the difference between the health insurance market and other markets. So in the health insurance market, the patient is at a disadvantage for two reasons. One, healthcare costs and healthcare needs and healthcare services are very complex and no one is able to understand whether they should get a lab or not get a lab, right? When the doctor wants to make sure that they're covering any liability issues or something like that, we can't expect the consumer to be able to have the information to make a decision about what services they should be accessing or not. That's up to the doctor, right? So it's already a little bit inherently different. Also, because of health insurance, the cost of healthcare is often obscured from the consumer. So maybe they don't know how much an ER visit costs, especially Medicaid doesn't require any copays. So a Medicaid beneficiary goes to the ER and doesn't know how much that costs to Medicaid, right? So they're insulated from those costs. And third, the health insurance or the private, or any health insurance is difficult to understand, any health insurance plan. It's also written by the health insurance company, not by the consumer. So it's maybe 40, 100 pages long. You don't really know it's covered until it's not covered, right? Until you go to the doctor and it's not covered. So the consumer is at a disadvantage in many ways in the health insurance market, and it's not operating under the under the normal market standards that we would want for like a healthy market, like buying vegetables or like going to a car wash. We assume that the consumer has enough information to make appropriate and cost-efficient decisions. But in health insurance, that's not the case. So pathways that we wanted to propose were option one, which is a public health insurance plan. And there are two different delivery mechanisms that we came up with for a public health insurance plan. This would be delivery through a private health insurance carrier contracted by the Cmi Government. So the Cmi Government, in this scenario, the Cmi Government solicits proposals and enters into a contract with a private health insurance company to offer a plan which is open to all individuals and employers in the CMI. And the cost could be shared between the individual, employer, and the Cmi Government. So I think that's a key component that kind of goes through all of our recommendations, is that there's cost sharing, especially for low-income individuals, between the government, the individual, and the employer. The second option for delivery is through the Cmi Government itself. In this scenario, the Cmi Government establishes a public option health insurance program. The administrator of such a program would naturally be the Cmi Medicaid program. Currently, the Cmi Medicaid program is authorized under local law to establish a buy-in option. However, currently the Cmi Medicaid program is not ready to administer such a program, but maybe in the future as data infrastructure and staff capacity is strengthened. And I do want to acknowledge that members of this committee have been very supportive of Medicaid's work for FTEs and resources, and that's very important for them to be able to establish such a buy-in option. Option two is the Obamacare model, mimicking the strategies of the PPACA to strengthen regulation of private health insurance, expand Medicaid access, and counter the additional insurance market reforms by mandating health insurance for individuals and employers, And currently, health insurance regulation in the CNMI is virtually non-existent. So this pathway would require a great deal of investment in regulatory infrastructure, in addition to the tax credits and other incentive costs to ensure that individuals and employers participate. So this would require a great deal of infrastructure that we don't already have. And I wanted to also present the third option, which is just doing nothing, the status quo. Under this option, the status quo continues. When the public health emergency ends, the CNMI returns to a 46% uninsured rate. CNMI residents continue to forego care only to end up in emergency care or with late-stage disease, and CNMI healthcare providers will continue to struggle to deliver services without adequate financing. Financial barriers to entry in the healthcare services market continue. And I wanted to make sure and list the status quo option because doing nothing is the easiest thing to do. And I wanted to make sure that we're fully aware of what we do or what happens if we do nothing. And I'm going to flip to the design matrix. How are we for time, Joanne?
We can go for a minute.
Okay. Okay, I'll just run through this quickly because there's a lot to go through. So different considerations are broken down into financing, benefits package, and I'm sorry, I neglected to put this into your handout, but it's in the full paper. Financing, benefits package, provider payment and reimbursements, contributing population and level of compulsion, the pooling of funds, the administration and management. So some questions that need to be resolved is, how should funds for universal health insurance be collected? Options are premium payments or a wage or income tax. The cost sharing responsibilities. So is there a deductible? Is there a copay? Is it affordable for families with low incomes? And again, is there to subsidize low-income families sufficiently to make sure that their premium is affordable. And then is collection feasible? So the collection of the premium payments, are we doing them in person or online, or are they part of a tax? That's something to be considered. Will the funds be sufficient? And I can't answer that question. Actuarial analysis, we don't have an actuary on staff, and we wouldn't need to. But actuarial analysis would need to be conducted to determine the appropriate rate. And then what benefits are included. So we could look at a comprehensive benefit package or just an essential benefits package. And then what is the associated cost? Again, actuarial analysis would need to be conducted. And how would participating providers be compensated? So there's 4 different options here. These are all different payment models that exist around the world and in the US. This is fee for service is just $5 for X service. Capitation is a fixed payment. So if you have an enrollment and you say you're going to get X number of dollars every month to take care of these people, that's a capitation payment. Diagnosis related groups. So this is a form of per case per day hospital payment. So if someone is admitted with diabetes, they get the doctor gets paid an X number amount for the diagnosis. And then a pay per performance. So this is a performance-based financing. It's value-based purchasing model that offers financial incentives to providers for meeting performance targets. So obviously fee for service is the easiest. Pay for performance is the most efficient, but it's the most difficult to administer as well. It requires a lot of data. And then how will providers be selected for participation in the program? And so will membership be voluntary or mandatory? And in pooling of funds, I just wrote that funds should be pooled because cross-subsidization between high and low risk groups is easier in single risk pools, which do benefit from economies of scale. And then administration or management, this is the private or public. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. So the costs. These are by no means actuarial analysis. I do not have access to historical claims data, which health insurance companies would not want to give me, and I wouldn't know what to do with it anyway, or how to properly analyze it anyway. So the cost of health insurance expansion depends largely on the design, so that's one, right? As is demonstrated from the decision matrix, and this is a complex decision-making process, but that's not to say it can't be done. I think all of this is very doable. It just takes time and careful planning. And absent the availability of an actuary, we put together a very rough estimates of cost based on this very simple equation. So we looked at the total claims cost of a plan divided by the number of covered lives, plus the total claims cost times 5% administrative cost. So we have like a very basic estimate. So using private health insurance market, we estimate it's about $1,400 per person per year. So per covered life per year would be the cost. And Medicaid is a little bit higher. Remember, Medicaid doesn't have any deductible or copay, and they cover travel off island. They cover off island services, a very robust service. So they're higher. So using the higher rate, it would be about $2,200. And I just wanted to put the warning in there. Warning, these are rough estimates. Do not hang your hat on these estimates. I just wanted us to have something to kind of envision in our head of what this might cost. And then assuming this Medicaid cost, this would break down to about $183 per month per covered life in costs. So this would still be outside of the range of affordability for many CMI families, especially those with a lot of kids. This is per life, right? But if these are split between the government and an employer and the beneficiary, maybe we're getting into the realm of something that's affordable for families. So this is just conclusion. Socioeconomic dynamics in the CMI pose a great challenge to the goal of healthcare coverage for all CMI residents. The cost of healthcare in the CMI, as is the U.S., is exorbitant relative to the levels of disposable income, poverty, and the cost of living, among other factors. So the CMI ought to consider locally funded premium support for individuals who are living on low incomes but are not eligible for Medicaid. And the CMI may also want to consider a sliding scale of premium support based on income, and might also want to consider requiring a larger employer share for employer-sponsored plans covering low-wage workers. So like we saw earlier, the employers that were working for wages were highly uninsured, and they were also working for very low wages. So that might be a consideration. And one thing that I wanted to add, and I don't know if the CEO is going to tell me, but if we move into a universal health insurance model in that program, I think there's a lot of opportunities to leverage the CHCC as a public entity to really drill down and see what is the actual cost of care. Right now, our rates are set at market rates, which are like bonds, so it's not based on the actual cost of providing the service, it's based on the market value. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to drill down when we don't have to deal with a lot of different insurance companies, when we don't have to deal with a lot of different types of payments and who has this copay and all that. We can drill down and the insurance plan, either public or privately operated, would have leverage over the CHCC to say, we need lower rates, we need lower costs. But I didn't say that in policy. Okay, any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Caitlin. Members, do you have any questions? Representative Beckham.
Thank you, Chair. Caitlin, thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question. Do you have any data or statistics pre 110-229?
Pre 110, I'm sorry?
Before they take over the federal minimum wage of the CMI.
Oh, on uninsured status?
Yes.
There would be data, so I can tell you where to find it. I don't have it on me, but it would be in the census. And the census collects information on insured status. It doesn't, so the census doesn't break it down by immigration status. Maybe it does. There's some missing cross tabulation in the insurance, but the census does ask a question about insurance and whether or not, I can't remember, but it would be there. That would be the only source that I can think of.
Oh, I asked that question just for the members and for yourself. That prior to 110-229, the CMI actually had existing statute that all employers shall provide insurance to their employees. So obviously those rates will be very, very different than what we have today. And a lot of the immigrant status also back then, right? There wasn't as many children from the immigrant status employees in the CMI, but it's also one that's needed for us to actually base our calculation. 110-229 actually decrease the number of immigrant workers into the CMI. And right now we're at 15,000, and we're giving an additional 3,000 for the next couple of years. But I'm a big supporter of CHCC's work and Medicaid's work, and we're working with Medicaid and our chair in regards to assisting in this direction with universal insurance for all people in the CNMI. Hopefully we can get that very soon so we can at least present it for the members to look at and CHCC in consultation with Medicaid. But I think if we get that information, that'll be very interesting to compare the differences. I understand that the hourly wage was $3.50 an hour prior to 110 to 209, and so just that being said, I mean, if we can get that information, so there's something that we can base ourselves off and maybe something to consider down the road, that if we wanna share insurance coverage for the private sector with the central government, that we need to actually implement some sort of law into the CNMI so that can actually work back into the system. I know it's going to be very unpopular for a lot of the private businesses, but if it's the general welfare and our health of our people is very important. And obviously the statistics show the challenges that the hospital itself, prior to becoming CHCC and getting the additional staffing down there to provide the services for our people, have actually decreased. But if we can share it, then we're obviously have to work on statute. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Actel and Representative Babalta, and then Representative Williams.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Ms. Caitlin, for presenting all of this information about universal health insurance for our CNMI. I am a huge supporter of this goal. It's something that we really need here, you know. And so thank you. This was so comprehensive, so much data, and I appreciate all the time and effort that you took to create this. So I'm very hopeful that we will reach this during this term. And so that leads to my question. You know, you stated that this is doable, but will take time and proper planning. So in your opinion, what does that look like? You have obviously already taken the first major steps to provide this information, but in your opinion, what would our next best steps be?
Well, so I think maybe something like a coalition of different agencies, public and private sector, to look at what design we would want to see. Also, assuming that the option that would, and I don't know who really would be making this decision, but if we're pursuing a PPOCA direction, obviously that's a very different conversation. It'd be heavily looking at the Department of Commerce and bolstering their regulatory capacity. If you're looking at the universal, and assuming you're not looking at the status quo, the public option, I think a coalition of different stakeholders, from healthcare, if we can find expertise from the health insurance, the private health insurance industry, obviously patients should be involved, and it would be nice to see more data from employers on what they'd be willing to contribute, and more information from the public on what they would be really willing to contribute to a pooled plan. And then obviously, we would want to have actuarial data and at least, a couple of finance people as well, to kind of start mapping out, at least answering the questions about what design is appropriate or what design is most appropriate. That would be the next steps, assuming that the public option is the option that you want to go with.
Thank you. And have you presented this information to any other entity or body?
No.
We are so proud to be the first. And I guess my last question would be in regards to medical referral, and if any of these designs had taken that into consideration as the medical referral being a part of CHCC or maintaining its position outside?
I guess that's a good point, because so ideally medical referral as a payer wouldn't be necessary under this model. Like under a public option model, we wouldn't need them to be a payer anymore. We would have the payer be the public option payer, which would cover off-island care. So currently Medicaid covers off-island care in the US, and Aetna does under certain plans. So we could make those cost estimates using the data that we have from Medicaid. But in terms of where the medical referral program would be situated, I don't know if it matters if we're just looking at, I mean, like in regards to this option, because it would really just be, you know, an ideal scenario, it would really just be a travel assistance. Because I think the medical referral program is solving for the problem of proximity, and that's the responsibility of the government to solve for that problem of proximity. We obviously don't have the market to support, you know, certain services, and we probably never will. So the solution is to solve for proximity, and then the payer would be the public option. So to answer your question, I don't think where it's situated under the public option model is really very important.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Representative Balta and Representative Regular.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Caitlin, for your presentation. I guess the question I have is, do you have any data as to, at least with Cmi government employees and with Aetna, I think just a few years ago, introduced the basic plan option, which is far less than what one would pay for a low plan. Have you noticed the shift in employees switching the basic plan, or at least getting those that were uninsured into that basic plan?
That's a great question, and I also asked that question. So I asked finance for, you know, for the Aetna data, for the, you know, government health insurance plan data, and then specifically about, you know, what was the enrollment patterns? Were people actually going for that low option kind of catastrophic plan? I know Aetna doesn't want to call it a catastrophic plan, but that's basically what it is. And the answer that I got from finance was they actually don't keep that data. So they were asking different agencies and they weren't getting responses. So I mean, we could find that data, but like and I think even the CHCC was really slow getting that. I don't know if we ever sent it to them. So I was like, okay, never mind. It would rely on the different agencies collecting and tracking that historical data about how many of their employees are enrolled in what plan. So to answer your question, I don't have that data. That's a good question. I've also wanted to answer that question to see what interest is and what enrollment is like, but I don't have that data.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I just wanted to get that information because I mean, it went as low as at least the last quote I had was at $2.39 per pay period.
Right.
But I mean, even with that, even with people looking at that as a cheaper option, the deductible is real high. And so is the deductible also something that is kind of making people hesitant about purchasing the basic option? Yeah. So thank you. That was all I had.
Thank you. That's a great question, and actually that leads to my question, which is, did you get any sort of data or response from any of the insurance companies, Aetna included?
So I actually didn't even try with the private insurance companies.
Okay.
What I didn't know, like I didn't really know what I was appropriate to ask for. So I did ask for the Aetna data, which I got for 2020 and 2019, I think, or maybe it was just 2018. But then I like for the private insurance industry, I used the commissioners, the insurance commissioners reports to look at the markets as a whole, because I assumed they wouldn't be willing to share more granular data because it is considered trade secret, generally speaking.
Okay. So even like going to Representative Migueloni's question about the mix of enrollment,
they might
among the government.
Yeah, they might be willing to give that data. I mean, so there are rules about, like for example, if a new contractor were to have the government's plan and you know it's no longer Aetna, there are rules that Aetna needs to provide that claims history to the new provider. But in this circumstance, or like we're just people who work at the hospital and we're just doing some report. So I honestly just didn't even try.
Okay, well, thank you for that candor. And my last question, I was pleasantly surprised to see, like the positive response that you got from, I know it's a small pool of employers, but that most of them said that they wanted to offer some kind of health insurance option to their employees. And then I was also curious about, the surprise that you expressed that they generally seem to think that 75% is fair. Why is that surprising? What is typical for employers elsewhere?
Typically in the U.S., employers, I think it's about 84%. But I just assumed that there would be reluctance to pay any premium, much less a larger portion than the employees are responsible for. So that was my surprise. But generally, yeah, work or employer-sponsored plans in the States are 80-ish% employer and 20% employee.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I was just thinking like even though it does seem like the uninsured rate did go up quite significantly, particularly among private sector employees, contract workers in particular. But like if employers are generally willing to offer it, it's just they have all these other concerns, right? Like there's the cost, it's just difficult or complicated, right? If we could address those barriers, then getting their buy-in wouldn't be so difficult, right? So, okay, thank you. I yield, and I have no other questions, colleagues. I think Ms. Caitlin, we are good for now. So we'll be expecting the written report next week. Okay, thank you. Great presentation. And I think next up we have a brief presentation from Ms. Eleanor Cabrera from CHCC. Colleagues, this is regarding the Cmi's prescription drug monitoring program, and for your information, CHCC is requesting legislation to formally establish the program. A draft has been sent to my office, and I will be sharing it with you as well. Oh, I can. Okay. I can move. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me so Ms. Eleanor, if you could just state your name and position for the record and introduce your colleague as well, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Sablan and members of the committee. My name is Eleanor Cabrera. I'm the CHCC's manager for the Overdose Data to Action program. And on behalf of our project director, Jesse Tadella, who is also our Deputy Chief Operations Officer, and of course our CEO, Esther Munya, I thank you, Jesus Masi, for the opportunity to present to your committee on the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, otherwise known as the PDMP. Our presentation is entitled The Implementation of the PDMP at the Commonwealth Healthcare Corporation, Understanding PDMP Benefits, Data, and System Features in Preventing Substance Use Disorders and Overdose in the CMI. And joining me today is my colleague, Monica Costamo, who is the OD2A's PDMP System Analyst and Coordinator. And if you can permit me to recognize OD2A was born out of a cooperative agreement between the CHCC and the CDC in 2019 as a 3-year grant. 100% of grant funds provided are for the CHCC to collect quality, comprehensive, and timely data on non-fatal and fatal opioid-involved overdoses, and for activities for the use of the data to inform opioid prevention and response efforts. With the increase in opioid-involved deaths across the United States and territories from 2019 to 2020, and the rise of illicit synthetic opioid-involved deaths, namely in Western states, and also the ongoing rates of opioid addiction and deaths attributed to prescription drugs, particularly opioids, especially since the start of the pandemic. The CDC decided recently to extend the OD2A funding for 4 years instead of 3. So since last year, the OD2A has focused on 2 components, surveillance and prevention. With the absence of illicit opioids in the CNMI, according to the DEA, such as heroin and illicitly manufactured synthetic opioids such as street fentanyl and carfentanil, surveillance data on prescription opioids in the CNMI was the initial target of data collection for the OD2A program. Data tells us, or lack thereof, that the prescription opioids have been dispensed within the CNMI at unknown rates for some time now. But what we do know is that from September 2019 through August 2020, with data requested of all 3 CNMI outpatient pharmacies from the OD2A program, is that more than 5,400 individual prescriptions involving opioids were dispensed to individuals in the CNMI across the 3 CNMI outpatient pharmacies. And 60% of those, over 60%, 61% of those prescription opioids are classified under the Controlled Substances Act as Schedule II opioids. The drug is approved for medical use, but has been identified as a substance with higher likelihood of abuse and higher risk for developing physiological addiction. Another 25% of what was dispensed of the opioid medications include Schedule III drugs, where again, the opioids are approved for medical use and the likelihood of abuse is lower than Schedule I and II drugs, but the risk of developing psychological dependence is high. Surveillance data tells us the CNMI, detected in the CNMI for 2020, but analyzing for and detecting for overdose deaths in CNMI. Considering the dispensation of opioid medications into our community, we wanted to take a closer look to see what levels of opioid misuse is occurring in the CNMI. So we ventured to analyze our electronic health record closer and discovered 22 patient encounters at the CHCC emergency department involving suspected and confirmed cases of prescription opioid misuse or abuse. And as of today, for 2021, to date, in the CNMI surveillance data activities have detected already 2 opioid-involved non-fatal overdose encounters and 25 patient encounters involving opioid misuse or abuse. So the OD2A uses the data to drive our second focus, prevention. Prevention is why we are here today, and preventive action taken by CHCC is the framework around a prescription monitoring program that is key to ensuring that the CNMI stay ahead of the opioid epidemic and the rates of opioid-related harm that have been plaguing fellow states and territories for some time now. Next slide, please. So a PDMP involves a system. The system is an electronic web-based database built upon HIPAA and HITRUST compliant platforms, whereby pharmacies submit dispensed medications data in a standardized format for electronic transfer. The medications data submitted by pharmacies is received by the system and is compiled, validated, mapped, and refined to then display among various system features as information for an authorized user to view and apply towards clinical decisions for patient care. The PDMP system opened up to CNMI pharmacies in October of 2020 to register. The system opened up to all licensed prescribers and dispensers in the CNMI to register for authorized user accounts. The PDMP system, as you can see on the side, whose landing page is at pdmp.chcc.gov.mp, went operational recently on January 31st, 2021 for patient search queries by authorized users. And the available medication data in the system goes back to January 1st of this year. System insight features and reports on providers' prescribing practices are in development as medication data builds in the system. And the OD2A program will be able to provide PDMP data directly to prescribers and dispensers that are not limited to their prescribing practices data as feedback for quality assurance and enhanced patient care and safety. Next slide, please. So the implementation of the PDMP involves 5 pillars of purpose. At the forefront is number one, legitimate medical use. The PDMP is not intended to develop a culture of fear among providers to order, prescribe, dispense, and administer controlled substances such as opioids. Rather, the PDMP is a tool for providers to respect and support a patient's right to quality pain assessment and management. And the PDMP is a tool for providers to incorporate prescribing practices as recommended by the CDC to safeguard against their patients' risk for misuse, addiction, and overdose. The PDMP also assists providers in identifying patients who may be misusing, growing dependent, or addicted to controlled substances, so providers may enter into honest and open discussions for medical intervention and referral to treatment and recovery services. The PDMP also works to aid providers and the CHCC's detection and deterrence of controlled substances being diverted from legitimate medical use. PDMPs across jurisdictions have also driven public health policies and informed initiatives by outlining drug and prescription trends that allows for data to be translated for CHCC and the CMI to address community health concerns regarding substance use disorders and overdose treatment and recovery needs. Last, the PDMPs also provide an avenue to increase patient and provider awareness and accountability about opioids and other controlled substances, and boost public awareness about opioids, their risks, and the potential for opioid-related harm that really can happen to any one of us. And now I'd like to turn over the presentation to Monica. Good morning. Good morning, House Chair Committee, Tina Savlan, and other healthcare committee members. I'll begin by talking about who has access to the system. Protected health information is restricted to the following roles: dispensers or pharmacists licensed to dispense medications in the CNMI, prescribers such as physicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, nurse midwives, dentists, podiatrists, optometrists with prescriptive authority in the CNMI, and their delegates. Prescribers and dispensers are allowed to assign up to 2 delegates to query the system on their behalf. And delegates can be licensed practitioners or non-licensed clinical staff that are in the same professional practice or facility where the prescriber dispenser practices. And last, OD2A program personnel directly engage with PDMP administration, which include our OD2A program manager, myself, the coordinator, our PDMP specialist, and our IT analyst. As Eleanor mentioned earlier, the data comes from all 3 CNMI pharmacies on a voluntary basis, and information collected and displayed for authorized users are patient information, such as name, address, and date of birth, who the prescriber was, where the medication was picked up, and medication information such as name, type, strength, quantity, date dispensed, days supply, and number of refills. And here we have the CNMI registration rates for the PDMP across the CNMI that includes CHCC and the private clinics. As you can see, we have a 90% registration rate with a total of 123 authorized users. And we believe this is a direct result of outreach efforts and educational information sessions such as this one. And just in comparison to the closest PDMP on Guam, their registration rates are about 20%. And goals and benefits of the PDMP include, of course, for users just to decrease opioid prescriptions and morphine milligram equivalent levels in the CNMI, reduce opioid and benzodiazepine co-prescriptions, avoid Holy Trinity prescriptions, such as opioids, benzodiazepine, and a muscle relaxant, to prevent opioid-related harm, abuse, and risk of overdose, increase patient intervention and referrals to treatment. And for administrators, of course, the exchange of information between prescribers and dispensers to coordinate with prescribers in safeguarding patient health and safety, and OD2A shares de-identified data to stakeholders on a monthly basis to inform prevention and treatment response. Here on this slide, we have the cost for implementation, which is around $700,000. These costs include fees such as procurement of a SANS or a storage area network, vendor implementation fee, procurement of PDMP workstations, network access, EHR integration, personnel and fringe, travel, and printed media. And maintenance costs to continue PDMP would be around $385,000. And fees for this include personnel fringe, operations, rental for office space and vehicle lease, travel, network fees, and subscriptions to drug databases, annual service fees, and annual data storage increase fees. And then, of course, there are zero costs to authorized users. There are no registration fees, no user fees, connection fees, transaction fees, absolutely no cost to any of the CMI healthcare providers. I'd like to open it now to questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Colleagues, are there any questions for our panelists? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. The question I had was on the part where you said this is on a volunteer basis, and so when I saw that you have 80% of prescribers registered into this program, what are the challenges of the other 13%?
Thank you. That's a great question. Actually, for the CHCC, also in October, as part of the program, we had worked with clinical and administrative leadership of CHCC to adopt a policy, a patient care policy requiring all CHCC prescribers and dispensers to register for the system. So with respect to the volunteer registration, that would be in reference to the private providers. And a lot of them, as you can see from the numbers, have recognized the value of the PDMP. And for those, I think it's just a matter of ongoing. This program is very new and just being able to provide more outreach and training. And we're confident that with continued education and training and understanding of the system, that will yield to better results with respect to over 90% of our registration rate. We understood from a pre-implementation survey, one of the things that the program also did was working with our pharmacy to also adopt opioid stewardship policies in the system to also ensure that our prescribing policies were aligned with CDC guidelines. And with that, we were also able to really try to understand, have a better idea of where the providers in the CNMI were in terms of previous experience with the PDMP, and more than half of the providers have not had any experience and not even access to PDMP. So we recognize from the get-go a lot of our efforts to provide a lot of basic information first about what the benefits were, then of course tackle their understanding of the technical aspects of it.
Representative McGuire, you still have the floor.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other questions from the members? Representative Boston.
Thank you very much for your presentation this morning. I am wondering about I guess the need for the program. I completely support it. addiction is something that our community suffers from. We hear a lot about ICE, right? But we don't really hear much about opioids, and I'm glad that we are trying to stay ahead of it, right, before it becomes a real problem. But, and you did give us some numbers earlier about, 2021, we already have about 25 patients and 2 overdose-related issues. What is your, and since this is a new program, the PDMP program is new, what is your collaboration efforts with maybe the Hope Center or CGC? And, I'm looking at your maintenance costs, and if there are any, I guess, discussions around collaboration to reduce some costs?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. Part of what we do also is engage in, first of all, weekly discussions with our leadership, both clinical leadership and the leadership over at the CGC. And that is in response to create an opioid response team to address issues of prevention as well as response, and how we use that information gained through surveillance and, of course, the PDMP to work with the specialists over at Community Guidance Center so they can better target expansion of their own clinical services, especially with regards to opioids. Opioid use disorder can be treated with medication-assisted therapies. And so there's particular regulations that are required for particular services to be provided, which would entail CGC services with respect to being able to prescribe opioids for the treatment of opioid use disorder as opposed to pain. And then also with our monthly stakeholder meetings, we do involve the first responders. Quite frankly, I've been pretty limited in engagement because of all the reassignments associated with COVID and mass vaccinations, but not without a lack of interest, because they are concerned about what these prescriptions might yield to. The pathways towards substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, and overdose deaths are pretty clear. And with the use of the system would allow, first and foremost, to be able to change prescribing practices in a way that really account for patient safety at the time upon initial prescribing or of any controlled substance. And then also, of course, if they're going to include in their clinical decision prescriptions for pain. And so the PDMP system offers a barrier to those pathways of the problems we hope to prevent that would occur in the CNMI. Our population is very small. The devastating effects of opioid disorders and overdose is pretty profound. And this program, as well as the other preventive steps CAC is taking, is really an effort in true prevention, in primary and secondary prevention, to ensure that in hopes that this community will not experience anywhere to the degree of what's occurring across the states.
Right. Thank you. I completely agree with that statement. And I also completely support prevention and believe that is the most effective and cost-efficient way to deal with any kind of, health crisis and addiction crisis. What, other than this program, what are some prevention efforts made in the community?
Yeah, so we actually the program also engaged in a mass media awareness campaign effort. We've been targeting the youth population on social media. If you visit CHCC on Facebook and Instagram, we actually have been posting a number of stories to address myth and facts. We are concerned about, according to a DEA report in a meeting in October of 2020, youth members, especially in athletic teams, obtaining opioids from cabinets within their household and family members and sharing them, especially after a sports injury. And so we've been targeting a lot of our community messaging to that. As you, in your packets, you are also now seeing 2 brand new print brochures. We recognize, and through the survey to providers and nurses, recognize that they lack information in their own practice settings about opioids in particular, with the program being the first to really try to address this issue. So we have about 5,000 copies each, actually hitting all clinics across San Antonio and Aurora health centers, different practice setting areas in the schools, across the different government agencies, of course, and all the health entities, so that they may be able to use that in preparation for Prevention Week. So we have, and then we also are developing other commercials and videos to really try and target and maximize our efforts towards primary prevention. What we want to do is to decrease any initial opioid use, really is what the key is, and to encourage folks to think about and first consider, especially among the prescribers, non-opioid, non-pharmacological treatment options first, prior to the prescription of opioids.
Thank you. I yield. Thank you, Representative Balta and Representative Atal.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question on the slide regarding medication data. You mentioned that it was a volunteer basis that the pharmacists actually provide you guys. Is this just an understanding, or is that by federal law?
No, it's just by an understanding and an agreement that we have with them.
And
Can I add to that?
Sure.
The CHCC pharmacy is actually subject to CHCC policy for the submission of the data, but the two private pharmacies are doing it on a voluntary basis. They recognize and have actually been wanting a system like this to be developed because they feel prior to this development of the system, were spending a lot of time trying to figure out if there were other prescriptions of opioids from other providers being that the patient already had, and really trying to ensure for the safety. And so a lot of that was constant daily calls among different prescribers and other pharmacists to ensure that there weren't any other opioid prescriptions, so that would put this patient in safety in danger if they were to then pick up that particular prescription. And it's in reference to the part of the medications data with regards to morphine milligram equivalents. Every opioid has a conversion of an MME that totals up on a daily basis that would indicate whether a patient would be at high risk for overdose. And so a lot of that was going around pharmacists. So now with this system, the onus is put upon the prescriber to look into the system and ensure that before they prescribe, that they are already aware of what the current medications are in the hands of the patient.
Okay, so with that being said, so let's take, for example, of patients that are considered referral patients and they're sent off. Obviously, you don't have that information, right? Because they might be prescribed opioids while they're being treated or upon completion of treatment. Do you guys even have that information?
That's actually a great question. So part of the federal government through the Bureau of Justice has created an RX Check Hub. It's a hub that allows jurisdictions to exchange information direct from PDMP systems. So our system is, as part of in compliance with the grant requirement, our system is connected to that RX Check Hub, and that we have already data sharing agreements with the state of Nebraska. We're hoping by this afternoon we'll be connected to the Guam PDMP. Guam is not a recipient of the OD2A funds, but it's important to us that they, of course, this is where our medical referral population travels, and we're already in discussions over an agreement with the Hawaii PDMP. California is not yet connected to that federal hub, but we're watching that carefully to ensure that once they are, that we can pursue agreements with their state PDMP. And with respect to having our prescribers being allowed to access any medications our referral patients have picked up in any of those locations prior to their return back to the CNMI.
Okay, thank you. May I ask, how long have you guys been in existence, your specific division?
The grant was received in 2019. Okay. Due to the delays in COVID and onboarding. The program actually just started last June.
Okay, and our chair mentioned prior to your presentation that there's legislation needed to effectuate your office or that division.
The program is continued to be funded by the CDC at this time and set to sunset in 2023, excuse me. And, with respect to any pending legislation, in compliance with federal regulation and grant requirements, we're not able to at liberty to discuss or to support or defeat any pending legislation regarding PDMP.
Okay, yeah, and I just asked that question because the chair had mentioned it prior to CHCC and your office to come with a presentation. So, and the board has never requested anything, and I wonder if the board actually has the authority, being a governing board right now, right? So they have the authority to actually create the division within the chart of CHCC.
I think to maybe Ms. Kate will address the question about legislation, and I think it goes to like, is legislation necessary, right? If we already have a program that is established, you have a governing board, a lot of autonomy. So Ms. Caitlin, could you address that question?
Sure, and I am locally funded, so I can speak freely about lobbying and legislation. So currently, as you guys mentioned, you picked up on that it's voluntary submission and it's voluntary use by providers. Legislation is effective or legislation would mandate the use of the PDMP, both for pharmacies to submit the data and then providers to look at the patient record before they make new prescriptions, or there's different protocols that need to be followed to actually access the data. So like Eleanor and Monica said, the participation is already pretty good and it's growing, but without the mandate, we won't have a complete data set, and there can be things that fall through the cracks. So that's really the need for legislation.
Okay, so there's no federal mandate.
No.
There's no federal mandate. Okay.
No.
So yeah, I was asking that question. Actually, that was my concern, was the actual information. If that's the mandate that's needed within the CNMI.
Right. There's no federal mandate. There's no federal program for prescription drug monitoring programs. Every state does have one. And I believe every state is mandatory. You guys can say it. Every state does have mandatory participation in the prescription drug monitoring program that they have in the state. So I think we're the last. Maybe there's like America and Samoa or doesn't have one yet, but everyone else has one, and the submission and the participation is mandatory based on statute. But it's state by state, not federal.
Okay. So then, if we have that information, let's say a patient moves somewhere to the mainland, they can actually transfer that information to that state, correct?
So Eleanor can field that there is a connectivity opportunity, and I'm not sure the status on that, so I'll get that back to Eleanor.
There are two facets to that. A patient can request their PDMP data at any point in time, just as they would any copy of their medical records, and can take that whenever they're to move. With respect to the prescribers in the receiving state of that person, if we have a data sharing interoperability agreement with that state, that prescriber can query our system directly under that patient name. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does actually. That's where I was kind of leading to. If that's the actual statute that we need, was the actual, rather than making it a voluntary basis, it's mandatory basis. I guess that was the legislation that I was thinking in my head when you mentioned voluntary basis. But since your entity or your division's already there, I was kind of confused of whether the entity was needed to be created to have you guys actually be effectuated after the grant. But yeah, I guess we can work on that legislation with your office and use other states that's closest to our Southwest as Public Defender Arctic said, we cut and paste on the legislation from California. It doesn't make sense here in the CNMI, so we want to get legislation that would make sense in the CNMI. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Ansel. And did you have anything else you wanted to raise? Any closing comments?
Just closing comments. The majority of the jurisdiction, and Caitlin is right, we're one of the last. The U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, as far as we know, don't have the systems. The state of Missouri actually does not have a state PDMP, but I believe St. Louis is working on developing their own system for that particular capital area. And what I wanted to say about that is a lot of the jurisdictions were initially funded through justice grants and had really initially began as more of a criminal activity detection tool. But over the course of the epidemic of opioid overdose deaths and the involvement of medical professionals, it has truly become a tool to try to make changes and make waves with regards to prescribing practices, all in an effort to avoid misuse, dependence, addiction, and overdose. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Cabrera, and thank you, Ms. Crisostomo, for your presentation. So, colleagues, I will share that draft legislation with you, and we can go from there. So next on our agenda is anything under miscellaneous. Having none. Oh yes, Representative Obama.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And earlier Rep. Manglonia stated that the committee may want to contact DNR in regards to the dog program. And I wanted to just bring to your attention and the attention of the committee that the governor has issued an executive order, another one, 2020-09, reorganizing and transferring the animal health, another one, 2020-09, reorganizing and transferring the animal health section of DNR to the Division of Customs Services. Oh. Yeah, and so, I know that we do have that time frame or that timeline of 60 days to respond, but this is reorganizing the executive branch, natural resources, to the Division of Customs Services of the Department of Finance, and directing the establishment of an Office of Information Technology within the Department of Finance. So I think that this is an executive order that may be referred to this committee and possibly my committee, the Committee on Natural Resources, because of the affected and impacted sections. I think JGO may be overwhelmed at the moment, but I suggest that speakers send it maybe to both of our committees for review and response, because I have been in communication with the Director of Courts from Guam, who works closely with the quarantine division here, and they have major concerns about combining the two, just this restructuring that's happening. Yes, and that is because of how it's modeled on Guam and how quarantine does play a very important, vital, separate role from customs inspectors. And they look for different things, and they have complex policies to enforce, federal policies. And usually when restructuring happens, then lack of resources, happen, lack of attention and proper attention and training to those not prioritized. Yes. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention and the attention of the committee members. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for raising that today, Representative Zapata. I think it's definitely worthwhile to inquire about the intention for the transfer, the motivation behind it, and so we will look into that. Even if it's not referred to this committee, I will inquire, and we should have a report back by our next meeting. Thank you. Are there any other announcements? Miscellaneous, Representative Donald?
Thank you, Chair. I know I asked several questions regarding the new quarantine guidelines, but since then I've gotten some questions from, I guess, mainly the voters on Rota. I did get some clarification from CEO Munya, but the concern that some of these voters have is if they travel to Guam and then come back, are they going to send them to Saipan to get tested, or are they going to get tested on Rota? I don't think, if I recall, I don't think Rota has the capability of confirming these tests right away. They would have to get sent off and run it here on Saipan. But I can check on that. But mainly for the voters that frequent travel to Guam, and how would if they fall under Class A, how would that affect their return into Rota as opposed to having to go through Saipan? And so, yeah.
Okay, so fully vaccinated voters who are traveling to Guam and coming back.
Correct.
To Rota. Okay.
And that, I think the last info that I got from CEO Munoz was that they would still have to do an inspection to ensure that everyone in the household is vaccinated. But then again, under the quarantine portion of the guideline, it says that anyone that is fully vaccinated is free to move about the CMI. So that's another concern that they brought up.
Okay, thank you. I will bring that up with CEO Munya and then the COVID task force. And if she, yeah, I'll ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any others under miscellaneous?
I have a question.
Yes, Representative Tabata.
Thank you, Chair. And just going off of Rep. Donald and your statement about the task force, how often do you meet, or can you just give us like a brief?
Were you part of
Not that you're part of the task force. Are you in the chat group?
Yeah, I have not been added to the chat group. And actually, I have not attended any meetings of the task force, but when inquiries come up, they do respond pretty quickly. CEO Munya in particular, but I've gotten responses from the guard, from the chairman of the task force, and so I actually don't even know how often the task force as a body even meets, right? So I think it's primarily my impression is that like the public health officials are just doing their thing. It's part of their regular day-to-day jobs, and to my knowledge, at least we have not been from the legislature, as the vice chair and I are the COVID task force reps for the House. We have not been invited to any multi-agency task force meetings. And I don't know that there have actually been any since we've been appointed.
Thank you. So clarifying.
Sure. Thank you. Any others under miscellaneous?
Ready?
Okay. Under announcements, so the schedule of public hearings on the medical referral program has been released. Rota, May 6th at the Library Conference Hall, Timian, May 10th at the Courthouse, Saipan, May 21st here in the House Chamber. All hearings will start at 3:30 p.m. We've confirmed the government witnesses for Rota and Tinian. We are still confirming the witnesses for the Saipan hearing. But details will be issued for Saipan's public hearing very soon, maybe hopefully by early next week. So, yes, Representative.
Oh, one more thing under announcement, I guess the town hall for Rota is tentatively scheduled for the 6th at the mayor's office as well. So this would probably be right after the scheduled hearing. So if the chair of the committee would like to present anything on that day to inform the people of some of the stuff that the committee has been doing and is planning these next couple of months, feel free to share that, and all members will be given a chance to present to the people of Rota as well. So I invite the committee chairs to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Mangolian.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye. All opposed, say nay. This meeting is now adjourned, and it is 12:06. Thank you.
Thank you.